Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is that you are, wherever you may be. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day. I am Brad Franklin, Digital Media Relations Manager here in Chesterfield. I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again. You feel that feeling in the air, folks. It's the crispness of the air, right? The grass isn't growing anymore. We don't have to cut the grass every 5 seconds, right? It's this perfect feeling. This is, to me, is what I think of when I think about football season, is really when playoffs arrive. And as we are wont to do on this podcast now, we are going to come and talk to you about the playoffs here in Chesterfield that will begin this weekend. As always, my partner in crime here on this, Jim McConnell, Creative Crime Director here in Chesterfield. Welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you very much for coming back on the show and talking to us about the playoffs. Obviously, when we last spoke, we had a sense, right, that Matoka was in a good spot, Bird probably in a good spot, Midlothian, Manchester. We were kind of curious about how things would play out. Ultimately, Chesterfield got 5 of its 10 teams into the playoffs. We're going to go through that here in a minute. Again, I do want to touch on really quickly, for those who may not be aware, there's a difference in terms of the sizes of the schools that sort of dictates how this works. So you're going to hear us talk about Class 5, Group C, Class 6, Group A. And what that means is, or I guess Region A, I guess is a better way to say it, right? So the idea here is that they are classified by the size of the schools, and then they are broken up by location largely into different regions. And so the way the playoffs work is you have 4 regions in each class. You have 4 teams in each little, grouping, so to speak, and they all play through. So, for example, Manchester, who finished 7-3 with 4 straight wins to end the season, is in the playoffs. They're 6A. They will not play Matoka, who is 5C, right? So technically speaking, Chesterfield could absolutely have multiple state champions from the same county, but it is driven by the size of the schools. So for folks who aren't sort of familiar with that piece of things, when we get into this, if that confuses you, try not to get too in the weeds on the idea of one team to rule them all. That's not really the way it works. And to an extent, it makes sense, right? The larger schools have just a different sort of situation, right? Because of the number of players, or the number of students, and therefore the potential number of players they can get from that. All right, Jim, before we dive into the teams that made the playoffs, anything really surprising for you? Anything that really stands out aside from maybe some of the things we said midseason actually sort of holding true? What are some of your takeaways?
I would say I'm not really surprised by anything other than the fact that I think when we talked before the season started, we were pretty much right on. I mean, I think we thought we didn't know, but we did. So I'm patting ourselves on the back collectively here.
Good job to us.
Yes, good job by us as always.
Good job, Jim. Well done. No, I think we certainly understood Matoka was really talented. I don't know if we thought they would be almost undefeated talented. We certainly knew that there were some things that different teams around the county had to work out in terms of changes that they were sort of juggling a little bit, sort of working themselves through. Certainly some of the teams that made the playoffs figured that out. I love the fact I mentioned a minute ago, Manchester finished the season really strong, right? Back-to-back 54 points or more for the first time since 2018. I mean, that's a heck of a stat, right? So as we go through this here in a second and sort of set the table for the matchups that are coming this weekend and then potentially down the road, certainly it does fit with a lot of what we've been tracking throughout the season, from the preseason to the midseason. Let's start with Matoka. I think that's probably the program that, if you look at it, they are the most likely to maybe go far in this playoff. Matoka is in Region C of Class 5. They finished at, I said 10-1. I meant 9-1. 9-1. They'll get Patrick Henry of Roanoke, who finished 7-3 this season. They'll get them. They are the 7 seed on Friday night at home at Matoka High School. In terms of the amount of talent that Matoka has, and certainly the way that talent has, it's one thing to be talented, right? The numbers that the Warriors are putting up right now, even in this loss to Dinwiddie, which was a tough one. They lose at 45-39 to end the season. They led as many as, I think it was 33-14 at one point. Generals come charging back, and then Matoka kind of readied the ship, kind of steadied themselves, scored late. Dinwiddie was able to sort of get that last score to win it. But overall, it's one of those things where it's when you have this much talent and guys are playing as well as they are, a loss is not always a bad thing going into the postseason. Tell me a little bit about sort of what you think of Matoka's place going into the playoffs.
Well, I think at one point in the Dinwiddie game, they had run 5 plays Matoka, and they had 250 yards and 21 points.
Right. Yep.
So hard to be much more efficient than that. Hard to be much more explosive than that. And frankly, they return guys who made the state semifinals last year.
Right.
And that experience, I think, Dinwiddie is a blue chip program in Virginia.
Absolutely.
Losing by 6 with 27 seconds left does not change my view of them at all.
Not at all.
I think they're the team to beat in this region pretty clearly. No offense to William Fleming.
Yeah, William Fleming finishes 9-1. And this is another thing, as we talk about some of these teams, you're going to hear us say like records, right? Well, records aren't necessarily apples to apples in terms of like one team's 9-1, one team's 9-1. Well, why did this team get that? Well, there's a whole matrix of how the Virginia High School League, which is the governing body for sports in the state of Virginia, the VHSL has a rating system to essentially sort of rank teams in the same region or in the same class, such that when it comes to who's playing home field, if they have the same record, or in some cases, who gets the home field, even if they have a worse, quote unquote, worse record. It kind of depends on who you play. And so a lot of that sort of goes into the voodoo of how all of these things sort of shake out. My thing for Matoka really comes down to how, when you have such talented kids, I mean, you think about like Newton Short and how productive he is. I mean, if you're Patrick Henry or down the road, if you're any other team in Region C, like, how do you slow down all of the options at once? And I think from a game plan perspective, if Matoka goes into this as they have approached the rest of the season, it makes sense that like you're going to have to pick your poison. And then the question is, can guys just continue to execute? And I think with all of the different weapons they have, getting out of the first weekend seems, again, love and respect to Patrick Henry, Roanoke, getting out of the first weekend doesn't seem like even a large hill to climb. It's a question of how, playoff football is, and playoff anything really is you're always a little bit curious because what's the saying that matchups make fights, right? So you're going to be playing teams that you don't historically play or you haven't seen very often except for maybe in the playoffs. So it's a question of execution. So you're going to make Matoka pick its poison. And then the question is, can they execute? And I feel like with this Warrior bunch, it's going to be hard. It's hard for me to see them being slowed down until I actually see it happen, if that makes sense.
Yep. And I think they're pretty clearly better than they were a year ago. And my memory isn't as good as it was a year ago, but I'm pretty sure they got through the region while allowing 3 points in 3 games last year. So, if I had to say today, I'd have a hard time thinking anybody has a better chance than they do, even though they're the 2.
Yeah, even though they're technically the 2 seed. Now, in that same Region C5, Class 5, LC Bird finishes at 7-3. They're going to host Hermitage, which finished at 6-4. They're the 6th seed on Friday night at Bird. An interesting season for them. They beat, they lost to Midlothian to the end of the season, 30-22. But it's just a solid 7-3 year. Again, goes back to some of those themes we talked a little bit about in the preseason. And certainly for them to sort of be back in the playoffs, to be in this position. And, that's a really decent matchup, it feels like, for them going into the opening round, so to speak. What are your general thoughts on Bird and kind of the season they've had thus far?
I think pretty much what you would have expected. Maybe, I think they've gotten back to being Bird.
Right.
And it's ironic that they play Hermitage in the first round because they've played in the playoffs literally like 92 times.
That's such a good point. Don't fact check us on that, but it's roughly 92 times. Yeah.
I think I said literally 92 times, and that was not
figuratively
right.
92 times.
Figuratively, it feels like 192 times.
Yeah, and you're talking about brands, right? A Hermitage, Bird here, Central. Like this feels like playoff football in Virginia, right?
It does.
And to some extent, if you think about sort of where Bird season has gone, they were really, really, really good against the teams that you feel like they needed to be really good against, right? They beat the snot out of Tucker. They beat the snot out of Clover Hill. They beat the snot out of RHSA. And had a tough win against Powhatan before the midseason. If you think about, so they go 2-1 from that point forward. And at this point, I think for them, like you said, they kind of got back to being the sort of maybe the historical sort of bird we're accustomed to seeing. So I'm really curious to see how that translates. Now, I will say Hermitage has had some moments this year where it makes you kind of stand up and pay attention. That record might be just a touch misleading. At 6-4, it feels like a team that maybe a 7-3 squad or something like that might just kind of have its way with. I'm certainly not saying the Bird's not going to win, but it does feel like a tougher matchup for them maybe than the record would imply.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of good football being played in Henrico County. No offense to Chesterfield or anything, but north of the river there was some excellent football being played. So toss-up game there. Yeah, definitely.
And it does feel like Hermitage is kind of, as Bird is getting back to its roots, Hermitage is kind of, it feels like maybe it's not quite the Curtis Grant days, but it does feel like they're sort of getting back to, those teams. All right. Midlothian finished 4th in Region C, Class 5. So that's they were 7-3. They'll host 8-2, 5th seed Louisa County on Friday night at Midlothian High School. Again, Midlo had a really strong close to the season. For a bunch that started the year losing to Monacan, which just missed the playoffs. I think they were 9th is what we figured out. They just missed it in 4B. But for Midlo to sort of have the season they had, congratulations, you're going to get to play Louisa.
Yes.
For those who are unaware, and Jim and I are going to try to talk about this in the most non-football nerd of terms. There's a kid at Louisa, a running back, Savion Hitter, who is legitimately one of the probably 5 best running backs in the country. This is a kid who was at Louisa. He left. He went the private school route. He came back home, and he's just putting up incredible, just insane numbers. Even though this is a home game for Midlo, this is a really tough challenge. That 8-2 is in part because Louisa doesn't play the same type of teams, but that doesn't mean they don't have the same type of firepower, if that makes any sense. Tell me a little bit about what you think of this matchup.
Yeah, their reward for being the 4 seed, their only reward is that they don't have to go to Louisa.
Right.
Which anybody who's never been there, I've been there a million times. Again, not literally. They kept a real lion.
Yeah, there's a real lion. Yeah.
By the field.
Yep.
Like, I don't know about you, but when you show up to a high school game and the team you're playing has an actual lion.
I love that you're really fixated on this.
It's one of those things. So their benefit is that they don't have to actually, I'm pretty sure Luis is not traveling with the lion.
I hope not. That seems like a logistical nightmare, personally.
That would be a problem.
But imagine the scenario, though. This is completely off on a tangent, but like the scenario where you actually have a lion and he comes to the games with you. Like, it's one thing if he's like at your place, but imagine if the lion, like, you get off the bus and, oh, by the way, there's a lion. Oh, that talk about like really messing with people's heads. The lion would, anyway. Meanwhile,
bring him out for the coin toss.
But we're going to bring this back to football because we can talk about the lion and how, but I mean, this kid at running back, he's good enough where, and he's multifaceted enough where you have to be able to it's not just like, oh, you got to play the line of scrimmage. Nope. They're going to spread you out. They're going to move him around. He can do literally anything. And it's almost like he is his own triple option. What I mean by that is, in those old Paul Johnson teams at Georgia Tech, teams would have to essentially, you play in the same gap every time, and you got to be there every time. You miss one tackle on this kid, he goes for 80 yards. Full stop. That's just who this dude is. And this is a significant challenge for Midlo. And frankly, I think it's one where if you come out of this and you're actually able to slay this lion, right? Man, it really does open up all kinds of confidence and possibilities for you as you go forward, because this is a Midlo team that has been through it this year, and they've really kind of steadied the ship. Of course, closing the way they did, the Gross kid is just playing just on a whole other level. There's a lot of talent in Chesterfield County this year, and he's right there at the top of it in terms of just overall ability. So this matchup on Friday night is going to be especially interesting, in part because of what Midlo has done this season, and certainly the way that they've sort of put it all together.
Yeah, I don't know that they've seen, like, we have really good talent. They haven't played Matoka. They haven't played the D1, high-end D1 kids that are going to play in the ACC next year. And
right.
they haven't seen anything like Savion Hitter.
No, that's
and nobody around here other than Matoka has anyone like him.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing, right? Is that in baseball they say it's hard to speed up your bat, right? Here, man, when you haven't seen when you're used to getting to a tackle or getting to the ball, and that kid's 3 steps away, he's
gone.
That's the thing. It's going to take a team effort, and I think that's obviously a big focus for them as they go into game week. All right, let's move over to Class 6, where we've got 2 other teams obviously preparing for the playoffs. Unfortunately for us here in Chesterfield, they're going to play each other. All right, so Manchester finished at 7-3. They are the 4 seed. They will host on Friday night the 5 seed Thomas Dale, who finished at 6-4. And interesting, it's always interesting to me that this happens, right? Where you get, in a region where you're going to have 8 teams, that the 2 from the same neck of the woods end up playing each other. This is an incredibly difficult. I mean, Class 6 in and of itself is a whole other thing, but Region A especially, you got undefeated Oscar Smith. You've got Highland Springs at 7-3. That Glen Allen team at 9-1. Those are your top 3 seeds. This is an incredibly challenging region to come out of, and whichever team does, get to the other side of the mountaintop here and is able to say they're the region champs and they go to the next round of the playoffs and try to play for states, you will have earned that ticket, because this is tough sledding. So for Manchester Thomas Dale, this is an interesting matchup for a variety of reasons. Tell me a little bit about your sort of point of view on it.
Well, speaking of, like we said about Bird and Hermitage being very familiar, I mean, Manchester and Thomas Dale have played in the playoffs the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
And the reward for them the last couple of years has been, because Manchester's clipped them both times, they've gotten Highland Springs in the playoffs.
Right.
Like the winner of this game gets Oscar Smith.
Yeah,
which
congratulations.
I'm pretty sure hasn't even had what would charitably be called a challenging game.
Yeah.
I mean, they are a juggernaut mixed with a steamroller mixed with
it's really sad that they couldn't have played Maury somewhere along the way, because that would have been a fascinating matchup. Maury is further down the classification, so to speak, but in terms of firepower, this is 2 really talented sort of teams. And you're right, Manchester and Dale, think about what I think they both, if you combine, they finished the season 7-1, right? So Manchester won its last 4. Bird finished 3-1 from that point forward. So I mean, 2 teams playing really good football, and certainly again, kind of answering those questions we talked about in the preseason, right? Dale has had so much success for such a long time. It certainly on paper, it doesn't look like this is the kind of year for them to sort of break through again. However, sometimes, these things don't match up with the way paper looks. And at the same time, Manchester is playing, as good as anybody right now. Certainly there are a handful of teams in the state who, teams like Oscar Smith, teams like Huguenot, teams like Battlefield, teams that are undefeated or that kind of thing. But if you think about the bigger picture, like football games, again, matchups make fights. And so, whichever team gets through this and has to face what will likely be Oscar Smith, because I can't imagine, Smith is, that's a different sort of program, right? And it doesn't matter. It tends to not matter who the coach is, doesn't see the talent that goes through that pipeline. Also, at one point, they had a tiger, for the record.
Not as good as the lion, because people say lions, tigers, and
bears.
Right,
oh my,
right.
Yeah.
So.
I swear to y'all, we didn't play in that. But no. So I think if you're looking at this Manchester Thomas Dale matchup, again, so much familiarity, so much is going to go into this, and whichever team gets that emotional high of getting a win in the playoffs, that might be their sort of parting gift, so to speak. That's the sort of reality of playoff football. Is you do all this and you get through it, and you're still going to have to go through, to your point earlier, a juggernaut on the other side.
And strangely enough, I think Manchester is probably the more complete team, but they're more reliant on offense. So I would say if Dale can get through, they probably can give Oscar Smith a better game, if only because their defense is up to that sort of level. They just had a hard time scoring.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing, is can you shorten the game? Can you maximize the opportunities? Can you force the other team to sort of be out of its element a little bit? And that sometimes has been the sort of the special brew of how you pull off an upset in these situations, right? You get a team that sort of is just used to being able to run. They run their stuff. They get out there and they do what they do. Well, suddenly, they're dropping third downs and they're not able to stay on the field, and this is weird, and everybody sort of gets a little bit jittery. And at the end of the day, like, these are human kids, right? These are not, even professionals, right? So like the little things can stack up, and especially in this situation, momentum. I mean, I know there are people out there who think momentum's not real in sports. I promise you, momentum is real.
It's real.
It's real. And, this is going to be an interesting matchup, and certainly one that I'll be curious to see whichever team comes out of this. We know at this point, at least one Chesterfield team will play in the next round. The question is then what happens after that. I think at this point it's safe to say that if however the playoffs go, if we have some teams that advance, maybe we return to talk a little bit more football to close before maybe one last time before the year's over. But Jim, I definitely appreciate the time, appreciate the opportunity to get on a podcast, talk football with you.
Absolutely, and it's my honor. And I would just say, keep an eye out next round as a segue. It could be Bird Matoka at Matoka.
Yeah.
For a chance to go to the regional final. And
yeah.
I'm pretty sure, I don't know that those two teams have ever played.
That's a really good point. And talk about a tough ticket. I mean, man. That
Fortunately, we're county employees, so I think they just let us walk right in.
I'm pretty sure they don't. I'm pretty sure that's not how that works. Somebody right now is very curious as to why we think that. But hey, you know what? I say you try, and you let me know how it works. And then we'll go. Appreciate the time, brother.
All right. Thank you, Brad.
All right. Now, make sure you check us out on social media. On Twitter, it's at Chesterfield, and on Instagram, it's Chesterfield, Virginia, all one word. And on Facebook, you can check out our podcast page, just Church Chesterfield Behind the Mic. Now, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, or wherever it is that your shows are sold. And if you're so inclined to give us a rating or review, we greatly appreciate it. As always, a video version of our show is available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website at Chesterfield.gov/podcast. That's also where you can submit feedback anytime, make some suggestions, or just reach out to us. You can watch the show on WCCT Thursday through Sunday at 7, on the weekends at noon. That is Comcast Channel 98, Verizon Channel 28. Lastly, check out Chesterfield.gov/connect with us to find out a number of other ways to connect with Chesterfield County. Thanks to my director, Martin Stith, my executive producer, Teresa, Bonifas, and all the good folks from Constituent and Media Services for all they do. My thanks to you for joining us today. So from all of us here in Chesterfield, thanks again for making us a part of your day. We'll see you again real soon. Take good care. From blogs to podcasts, and I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again. Newsletters to alerts, social media, the latest community news.
Welcome to the latest installment of This Week in Chesterfield.
How to get in touch, and everything in between. If you want to know about Chesterfield County, our Connect With Us webpage has you covered. Chesterfield.gov/connect with us. Connect with us, your source for all things Chesterfield.